I'll now hand over to our third speaker, who I'm delighted to say joins us from the United States. And welcome Terry Travis, the co-founder and principal of EVNoire. EVNoire is an e-mobility intelligence consulting group based in the US. Terry, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Terry, just to open up with a first question, what is the picture with e-mobility and the green recovery in the US? Are you talking very heavily about the idea of a green recovery over in the States?
Yeah, I would say that there are a number of principles and folks across the ecosystem who are thinking about what those opportunities are going to look like as we begin to restart the economy at, all different sectors.
Very good. And I mean, from my own reading, I see that quite a lot is happening at the state-led level. Could you give us a sense of what the recruitment feeling is, the job creation sense of things is, with the policy initiatives that are coming out of the various interesting states?
Yeah. So what happens is that, yeah, you're absolutely correct. At the state level, there has been a lot of movement across the spectrum. California, I would say, has been leading this conversation with beneficial public policy that, including in cleaning up the air and environment, also is beginning to prioritize the workforce and economic opportunities as well. In addition to that, you have state mandates that are being set forth by different governors. So California, going back to California, there's a initiative to get 5 million EVs on the road by 2030. North Carolina, there is a mandate to get 80,000 on the road by 2030, and so on and so forth. In addition to that, just Friday, Governor Cuomo in New York set forth EV infrastructure bill that is $750 million to really provide charging infrastructure across the state to connect the highways, as well as Florida and a number of other states around the country. You're seeing great movement. And with that movement, you'll see economic opportunities for jobs, because obviously you're going to need a workforce to be able to install that infrastructure.
So it's looking very positive, perhaps, from the US. You mentioned some initiatives more on the maybe passenger vehicle side. I understand there are some really exciting initiatives on the zero emissions trucks and vans side. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. More recently, 15 states signed an MOU to look at medium and heavy duty class vehicles. We know that those are large contributors to carbon emissions. And so we think that cleaning up that sector and that space will really go a long way in improving the air quality and public health benefits in the EV sector. So one of the things that, there's been a number of conversations. So it was interesting. You have 15 states sign an MOU to look into cleaning up that sector. And then again, organization, California Resources Board, passed policy or adopted policy that essentially by 2030, all vehicle in the medium and heavy duty sales will need to be electric. So with that being the 5th largest economy in the world, with these 15 states having this MOU, you're going to see a lot of movement in that space as well.
So, I mean, these policy initiatives are exciting, but they're also relatively new. Do you feel that there'll be some time yet before they start to translate through to a rise in recruitment and job opportunities, or is that already starting to happen?
So you have, yes, I think that the growth sector, or the opportunity for growth, is really now moving forward. You have, OEMs or manufacturers like Rivian looking to ramp up their facility in Normal, Illinois. You have BYD, you have Proterra. Now we have, in addition to that, there are a number of initiatives that are looking at school bus electrification. And so you have, Bluebird in Fort Valley, Georgia, and a number of other manufacturers who are looking to ramp up their workforce. More recently, in addition to that, we've had SK, a South Korean battery manufacturer, who actually announced a multi-billion-dollar facility, and before they could even get that one up and running, announced a second facility, because the demand for batteries is just going to be that great.
We can look forward to green, yellow buses.
Exactly.
Bus,
Exactly.
green, yellow bus.
Hmm.
So obviously, I know from our previous conversations that diversity and inclusion are a pressing concern for you in the States. I feel that that's an area that clearly needs to be addressed across the e-mobility sector. I'm sure you have some views on that.
Yeah, so in addition to EVNoire, we are also the founders of the largest network of diverse EV drivers in the country, and really with chapters in the Caribbean and in Europe as well. And one of the things that we really prioritize is that taking it back through the US lens, what we see is that there are disproportionately specific groups who are impacted more than others from a transportation emissions vantage point. And so when you begin to look at this, African American communities in the US, typically because of historic and systemic issues, reside in environmental justice areas or areas with poor air quality. So one of the things that we began to think about was that, as well as there are certain challenges, we have charging deserts in the US. And so if we're going to get widespread adoption, we really need to be able to address some of these issues and prioritize those communities that have been hit first and worst in this conversation. And more importantly, our organization, our membership organization, serves as the voice of this community and provides a safe space for individuals who are, diverse to be able to communicate, share resources and information. Because what we found very early on was for folks who are driving EVs, um, there were it wasn't the same. It wasn't the one size fits all model. So being able to have that space where folks who are purchasing an EV because they feel like they're going to save money, or folks who are buying it because of the tech, or whether they're driving for Uber or Lyft, whatever, all of those things being said, there were different challenges that we saw, and this membership group addresses many of those challenges.
And back to the subject of recruitment, are there any recruitment strategies that you're aware of with companies or other organizations within the US to reach out to a wider, more inclusive community of people?
Yeah, so it's starting to ramp up now. So what we're seeing is there's a few pilots and programs, some of which we're working on to really begin to train some of those what are defined as frontline communities or environmental justice communities to be able to install and maintain the charging infrastructure. And so you're seeing those programs pop up across the country, as well as there are a few internship programs with manufacturers to be able to train more diverse candidates. Because right now what we see across the space is it's a very monolithic group. And we think that there's opportunity there when you start looking at the fastest growth sector in the US economy in terms of things. The Latinx community has the fastest growth sector of the middle class. And so the idea is, if you look at the most educated group per capita in the US, it's African American women. So when we begin to think about this, these create real opportunities. So more recently, Union of Concerned Scientists and Consumer Reports facilitated focus groups, and what came out of those focus groups were the very groups who've been impacted the most by transportation emissions or carbon emissions are the very groups that have the highest propensity for EV adoption. We just have to prioritize that engagement and communicate in an authentic way.
Interesting. There's a question that's come in from Michael Tipton, which speaks to the last point you've just made about African American women being the most highly educated group within the US. This question is an interesting one in that context. It is, do you see minority groups in ownership roles in the EV sector in the US?
So currently, again, going back to that, uh, it's a very homogenous group of folks. Often when we walk in the rooms as the SMEs in the space, it is our team, and that's pretty much it. But there are some opportunities that I think that will open up, and I think that as we begin to as the market begins to mature, we're still talking about a frontier technology. And as the market begins to mature across the country, hopefully we'll see more diverse voices in this space. We have members who are working at every facet of the EV ecosystem. I have a member who developed a portable DC fast charger, to several who are manufacturing their own electric vehicle charging equipment as well as software. So, and we're seeing opportunities for growth across the space. So hopefully we begin to see more diversity in the space as things continue to mature.
Very good. And I know in our previous conversation, we've talked about people that work in marketing, and the marketing perhaps doesn't reach out to as wide a community of people in the EV space as it should. It seems to me like it'd be a good idea to have more recruitment into roles in marketing from a wider, more diverse community of people. What's your sense of that?
Yeah. So what happens is that, in the EV space, it's still, you know, very much so in its infancy. And so what happens is that traditional approaches to marketing EVs hasn't been approached. And so we're still focused on really talking to early adopters. And we think that that is not the appropriate approach. We think that we do a lot of data collection in the space, and the data has shown us that to expand the tent creates a vertical market. And so with that, if we're talking about marketing EVs, we need to have diverse voices being able to speak to that in a very authentic way. Transportation, because of historic issues, transportation is seen very differently in diverse communities. It's not as utilitarian. So the idea is that the messaging has to be approached in a very different manner. So hopefully as things begin to matriculate and move forward, we'll have folks or professionals who are working in that space that will understand those different nuances.
Interesting. Are there any policy initiatives that you know of that are looking to ensure that this sector is addressed, the diversity and inclusion question is addressed in the US, or not?
So there are, again, going back to the markets where we have the highest penetration, there are a number of pilots and programs that are now being rolled out to ensure that those vulnerable populations are included and not left out of this clean transportation conversation. But again, when you begin to think about the fact that very much so like what was described earlier in the UK, most folks still don't know very much about EVs or clean transportation. So we have to have a multifaceted, multi-channel approach. As we begin to explore more beneficial policy, we also have to do tremendous amounts of education, awareness, and outreach simultaneously, so that as we begin to get the single moms, the dads, the retirees, young professionals who are all looking at mobility and transportation options, how do we get them even considering EVs as a viable option for folks? So I think that it all has to happen simultaneously. And one of the things that we're struggling with now is who actually facilitates that. Is it the utility that facilitates that? Is it the manufacturer that facilitates that? Is it a regional collaborative that facilitates this? Is it a public health or NGO that facilitates this? I think that what has to happen in order for the industry to succeed is really a multi-channeled approach, and we have to begin to do this at all different levels.